native bees in Michigan, why we're here, how to identify and support our native pollinators. So first, we're going to start with someone who I know is familiar to many of you. I know that there tend to be a lot of beekeepers in this group. You are the honeybee experts here. It's not me. So this is our honeybee. Honeybees are not native to North America. We do not have a native honeybee in Michigan or in North America. The ones that are here were brought over by people. There's an Asian and a European honeybee. And this is what tends to be doing lots and lots of work in our larger agricultural systems. And a lot of people are also beekeepers and keep bees and collect honey and manage the hives. We're not talking about these today. So this is our only honeybee slide. And instead, I would like to share with you some of my very favorite creatures in the world, some of our native bees. And the bees that you see here, these aren't relative to scale to one another. Some may look familiar, maybe this one down here being sort of a large bumblebee, but it might be surprising that some of these, let's say this metallic green, it's a type of sweat bee, which you'll learn more about as we continue this evening. These are some of the most common species. I can pretty much guarantee every single one of you has some of these metallic green bees, these little tiny sweat bees, some cavity dwellers. These are in your yard too. These are some of the most common species that are in just sort of backyards in North America. And by the end of today, you'll be able to pick some of these out while you are observing flowers in your yard or on a walk, or maybe just seeing someone poking its head out of a little tiny crevice. So as we're getting started, I'm going to begin with a silly way I like to introduce bees to people, but it's easy to remember. So the things that all bees have in common. So one bee has two antennae, and you can see them kind of coming out of this bee's face right here, two antennae. 3 body parts. So we have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. 4, maybe surprising. One bee has 2 antennae, 3 body parts, 4 wings. So bees have 2 sets of paired wings. They actually have 4 individual wings. There's a forewing and a hind wing, and they can kind of hook together in this really neat way. It makes them incredibly strong flyers. More so than like actual flies. If you see a housefly flying around, they only have 2. Bees are stronger flyers. They have 4. 1 bee, 2 antennae, 3 body parts, 4 wings, 5, another be surprising one, they have 5 eyes. So here, and you see this nice up close portrait, you see the 2 really large compound eyes, which if you want to get super technical, these are actually made up of like tons and tons and tons of tiny individual lenses. And these compound eyes that kind of look like those giant Hollywood alien eyes, that's what gives bees like their vision. And then there are these little 3 tiny dots that I hope you see right here. And those are simple eyes called ocelli. And with ocelli, the bees are able to sense light. So if you see something you think might be a bee on a flower in your yard, you want to go check it out, be careful of your shadow, which might sound silly, but your shadow can scare it away. It might think there's a predator coming. These ocelli can also help bees climb out toward the light when they're leaving their nest and help them kind of navigate around underground a little bit as well. And then they have 6, like all insects, 6 legs. Their rearmost hind legs, especially on these, this female here, female bees have really neat pollen carrying structures on their hind legs. This yellow on either side, so there's the front leg that's kind of tucked under, you can't see, that's the second one, and then here we have the third. They're covered in really dense hairs, and they're very, very special hairs that can either be on that back leg or on the underside of the abdomen, depending on what species. Honeybees, I said I wasn't going to talk about them and I lied to you because here's another honeybee. Honeybees and bumblebees have a special kind of way they carry pollen that has a little, it's a pollen basket on that hind leg. That's kind of where the term the bee's knees come from. So they pack up pollen and put them in their little basket and carry them back home. But the special hairs on the legs or the abdomen, if you look in really close here, you can see on all these little hairs, they're actually covered in split ends. And it's that division, all those little split ends that increase the surface area that pollen can adhere to. That way that female bee can bring the pollen back to her nest and make a little pollen ball. And I'll show you what that looks like as we move forward. So this is what makes a bee, are most of these things. And I say most just because not all of them have those special pollen carrying structures, but all of them do have 6 legs, unless something really bad happened. Okay, so is it a bee or not a bee? On the left, we're looking at bees. On the right, we are looking at not bees. So if you see something like sort of wasp, yellow jacket family, one of the things that can help you from far away, if they have this super skinny waist, this really narrow waist where it comes down to almost like a thread connecting it, not a bee. Bees don't have, it's more kind of like snowmen, one body part kind of packed on to the other. We will look at some of bees' nesting structures, but if you're ever out and kind of like under the eaves of your house and you see this sort of nest looking thing, also not a bee, you're dealing with paper wasps or something different. In general, bees tend to look a little bit fuzzier than wasps. It's in general. There are some bees that don't really look pretty fuzzy, but those are some key diagnostics. Bees just tend to be a little chubbier overall. Chubbier and fuzzier. And 1,000 times cuter, but that's just me. Personal thoughts. So the majority of our native species in Michigan are actually soil nesting species. And the majority of our native bee species in Michigan are also solitary. So that means there is not a hive structure. There's not a queen, there are not workers, there are no roles, just one female bee, and she digs her own nest, and inside that nest, she will lay an egg. And here you can see a pollen ball that she has provisioned, this big orange ball in that bottom right-hand photo with a little larva on top, and that will develop over time and chomp away at the pollen ball. And then once it develops with its wings, that individual bee will leave the nest and fly away and have its own life. In certain species, most of them do more than one of these eggs. You can kind of see in this photo here in the middle that there seems to be little dividing lines. If you look kind of carefully, there's like something packaged here and then a division, something packaged and a division, something packaged, a division. So that's the way that she can lay an egg with a pollen ball and put a little barrier. And depending on the species, that barrier can change. And we'll talk about that a little more in a minute too. So species depth for soils, it depends on the species size. The hole is just about as big as a bee itself. So if you ever see a little tiny hole in the ground, it looks like someone sort of jabbed a pencil in it and walked away. Just sort of hang out for a minute and wait and see if someone's coming in or out. If it's in your yard and you're curious, if you take just a glass, like a clear glass, and just pop it upside down over top, so you're covering it, in a little bit, there's either going to be someone just banging into the side trying to get in, or someone on the inside banging on the side trying to get out. And that's how you can tell what bee has made their nest there. And finding bee nests is a very great skill. I think it's tough. Sometimes if you're lucky, you can come across this bottom left picture, which is called an aggregate nest. So there are a bunch of different individual nests here, and the bees are flying in and out. Sometimes we have these of some of our sweat bees in Michigan. Okay, I see a couple questions. There is a recording, yes. And the pollen ball size, that's a great question. I think, I've got an eraser right here. If we're talking bigger than like a normal pencil eraser, I would be astounded. These are pretty small little pollen balls. For those of you who are used to seeing like honeybees, when they remove the little pollens off of their legs, the little pollen balls, something like that size would be pretty standard. So thank you for that question. In the future, I will add a scale bar to this photo. That would probably be helpful. Maybe this little bee larva here might be like smaller than a grain of rice. Okay, so next up, how to provide this habitat for soil nesters. Across the board, what we're going to talk about today, just do less. Do less gardening. So leaving some bare patches of soil, places that you don't till, places that you don't put mulch or bark chips on top, make sure the only bare part isn't a walking path, so it's compressed soil, and use less chemicals. They just need some kind of non-compacted, naturally available soil. So the way I do this in my yard, this isn't a photo from my yard, but this is kind of the gist of it. You have plants up, and then you just leave bare ground in between. Don't put bark chips down. If you really like a bark chip look, totally cool. Maybe you just put it on the part that you can see from the road, and don't continue the bark chips going back into your garden. This doesn't have to be a big plot. When I was a grad student, I lived in Chicago in the city, and I had a window box that actually had a bee nesting inside. A lot of the soil depth doesn't really matter. If there's something, there's probably a species that can manage it that would have a shallow nest. If you're able to also leave some bare soil available in your yard that you don't till through, and whatever that is, that's also great. Just think about if you are thinking that, oh, my planters are probably the best thing I have for this, that's what I have available. Maybe try to get a planter you can leave out for the season, so you don't end up whisking the bee away or dumping it out with the compost or whatever that might be as they're developing. Next up, we have cavity nesters. And there are, I kind of have two things merged together, but that's okay. So first, for a cavity nester that does not create its own cavity, but they need just little nooks and crannies to move into. A lot of these are naturally occurring in wood, like fallen branches, or just, I actually find a lot of these, the masonry and at our house, like little nooks and crannies between bricks. These cavity nesters tend to be really happy in places that have a lot of human development, because buildings create little tiny nooks and crannies everywhere. Within things you could do in your yard to do this, and this is also going to help for our next group, the Carpenter bees, but leaving out some old firewood or even sturdy stems. So something like big blue stem or some of our native grasses, they're hollow in the center or easy for bees to excavate out. And leaving some of those standing herbaceous dead stuff over the fall, or some of it, maybe not all of it, in your front yard, I get it. That can be a great habitat as well. So again, just less gardening work equals better housing for bees. You can also provide these little nooks and crannies in places where you really think you want to have them. So if you, sometimes these are called bee condos, also called nesting boxes or nesting blocks. There are bumblebee boxes, or these little straw bundles that are grouped together, anything with a hole in it. And you can spend as much money as you want on one of these on Etsy. You can get a miniature version of your own house if you want, or whatever you're going for, or you can have a log and drill some holes into it and it'll do the exact same thing. There are different ways these are great questions coming up. There are different ways to, and what happens if I click, I will answer all of these live. Yes. To manage these. And it kind of just depends on how much time you want to give them. So first, yes, if you have just, let's say a low maintenance from a human perspective version of this, where it's just a wood block with some holes drilled into it, put it outside, put it somewhere sunny. That tends to be a good spot. I saw that question of what is the best placement. They tend to like sunnier places than shadier places. They need that warmth of the sun to get up and get moving, to help warm their bodies up. You might get wasps coming to it. I haven't seen wasps necessarily building nests in them, but I've seen wasps coming to come eat baby bees. So wasps are kind of like the vultures of the insect world. But wasps, some of them are predators, which is great in your garden. Wasps are not bad in your garden because they eat a lot of as predators, they eat a lot of problematic insects that might damage your plants too. But if it's not the right spot for you, or like right by your front door or something, maybe consider not by a place where there's a lot of people if you're worried about that. And I've also seen birds just come eat little larvae out. So if you're interested in a bee condo and you're interested in super protecting your bees, the best time of year to put them out, anytime. Now is great. Anytime there are flowers, once the flowers start, the bees are starting. So, something out maybe late April, and then leave it out all the way through to like into October when the goldenrods are finally done. And then if you really want to baby it, just put it in a box, put it in your garage, an unheated garage, because they use temperature cues also to start developing, but put it in some kind of container. That way predators aren't getting at it all winter. And then you can just poke a hole in that container in the spring. And if you leave it shut, and then the individuals can fly out the next year. So if you have 2 condos, you can kind of rotate them in that way. Full disclosure, I don't do that. I am the drill some holes in a thing and just hope it'll turn out okay, because it hopefully does. It should in nature. I don't know. But I don't baby them to that extent. I'm happy to answer more questions about that though at the end if anyone has them. Carpenter bees tend to they drill their own holes, and it looks like perfectly drilled holes. These are made by a carpenter bee. It looks exactly like a dime and a drill bit. Some of these can go kind of deep into wood, how they excavate their space. And you can see here, there's the little divisions made where in between where the eggs would go. Carpenter bees, again, just leave out some untreated wood, like an old log or something. They would really like that, especially sunny areas. They'll prefer untreated wood to treated wood. So if you see something, I actually have some right now behind a gutter. I'm trying to get them to realize there's a better place with wood you would prefer over here. But if you see them, you will know the big ones that make these holes, it looks almost like a bumblebee, but they have a really shiny abdomen. And I'll show you a little bit later how to tell the difference. And finally, there's one kind of bee, or one kind of nesting bee, that we actually can't provide habitat for. But if you have flowers to eat and you're making other types of bees happy, you might also make klepto-parasitic bees happy. And I don't know why in bee world we spell it with a C, and in bird world it's spelled with a K. But if anyone is a birder, an avid birder, you've heard maybe of cowbirds before. And so here you see where the female bird has laid her egg in someone else's nest, so she won't be caring for that individual. And that bird tends to be way bigger than the other babies in the nest that the cowbird laid her egg into, and then tricks another mom into, or other parents, because both of them will do it, into feeding her offspring. So a klepto-parasitic species. There are also klepto-parasitic bees. And these are the type of bees, this one is a little bit fuzzy and actually, frankly, adorable. Some kleptoparasitic species aren't the fuzzy ones, because the female isn't out collecting her own pollen to provision her own nest. She lays her egg in someone else's nest. And if you find these, they tend to be indicative of high quality habitat, because you need to have a really healthy bee community that has this species that she needs to parasitize, that she is seeking out, and that's the nest she'll find and lay her egg there. And we totally have these in Michigan, absolutely. Let's see, where was from 2 community gardens in Detroit are actually the last places I collected them. But like, we're talking like downtown, like right by Wayne State, like really a lot of development. So it really depends. If you have the plants there, sort of, if you build it, they will come, right? And how far will they come from depends on how big they are. Yes, this is actually a little radio antenna on a bee, and this is one of the ways that researchers try to track what is a bee's flight range. And bumblebees can go up to 2 kilometers, like no more than a mile. But you necessarily don't all the time. Like, why would they fly farther than they had to if there's food available and the nest isn't gone? And so our female bees are what are called central place foragers, where the nest is in the middle. And if, let's say, it'll fly 100 meters or fly like a football field, it'll go that football field in any direction as she's out foraging, and she'll keep coming back and dropping her pollen off. So there's like a circle around the house. I keep talking about female bees, and that's because male bees that are solitary, they don't have a nest. They aren't collecting pollen for any young. Male bee might have that same 200, football field flight range. And then the next day might wake up and fly 200 more and fly 200 more. They don't have the same central place foraging behaviors. And males tend to sleep in flowers or underneath leaves, and they sort of mate, and that's their job. That's it. For these foraging resources, so all bees eat pollen and nectar. Pollen is a protein and nectar is a sugar, and they need a balanced diet just like us. And like I was saying, only female bees are the ones collecting pollen. So you can see these two bees here are females. You see a bumblebee with that nice pollen basket filled up, and this one with the fuzzy hind leg. And then here are two different versions of how those pollen balls are then dropped off in a nest. And so we need to provide, as people, blooming flowers during this active period. And here I have May, late April. Basically, as soon as you start seeing flowering things, and that's including flowering trees, bees will also visit those. It's not just thinking about planting little flowers in gardens. It's great to then try to keep something blooming in your yard that entire time, or whatever property you are able to manage. So bees don't visit all flowers though. And there are different ways you can tell what is attracted to a flower based on how it looks and what it smells like. So bees are very attracted to flowers that are blues, purples, whites, yellows, even orange, but not the color red. So bees' vision is actually shifted. And so they can't see the color red. It's shifted down into the UV spectrum. So they can see essentially what we see under a black light is what bees can see all the time, which you can see here with what you all now know is my favorite flower, looking at Rudbeckia, so black-eyed Susan. So we see this sort of yellow, but the bees see these glowing orbs that are landing pads saying, come here, it is time. And so that, from the flower's perspective, is calling bees exactly to the right spot. It's called a nectar guide. And making sure that pollen is going to those receptive stigmas and the plant is getting pollinated and fertilized and be able to procreate and make seed. And from the bee's perspective, it's like a neon sign calling them to dinner. And it's really cool. And these will fade away when the flower is no longer producing pollen and nectar. They're like literally neon signs everywhere. A lot of our native plants have these. And sometimes if you go, I'll just say that a lot of our native plants have these, and they like flowers they can land on or flowers they can crawl into. That doesn't necessarily matter, just different shapes of flowers. And this is a series of commemorative stamps about pollinators, just in case it's fun or interesting. Things that are red and tube shaped tend to be bird pollinated, especially hummingbirds. Butterflies and bees like a lot of the same kinds of flowers. Like bees also really love milkweeds. And bats, which you can thank for tequila from agave plants. Bats like things that have really big bowl shapes that are very like full of scent, full floral scent, that so it almost smells like rotting, but not quite. And they just face plant right into them using their, at night, right? Using their sense of smell. And the ones that actually do smell like rotting stuff, like skunk cabbage, that's how they attract flies, smelling like rotting meat. You're welcome. Okay. So when you are considering how do I want to plant these in my yard, and this can be complicated. I have some native plants, like native flowering plants in my front yard. And sometimes, something like this picture on the right, where it looks like a prairie or a meadow, really beautiful, just a big diverse patch. That's great in a lot of places. Sometimes maybe a neighborhood has more restrictions onto, can you just make your front yard a prairie, or well, is that an issue? If you plant things grouped in clusters, it can tend to look a little bit more formal and purposeful. And it's actually something that's helpful for your pollinators to find them. So in nature, you can see these two pictures from actual prairie on the left-hand side. This blazing star is this beautiful magenta purple you see on the top photo. You can tell it kind of grows in patches anyway. They spread underground, like the roots will pop up and it'll spread vegetatively. And also when the seeds plop down like in the fall, they'll reseed kind of in the same spot. So like a clumped planting scheme, it can read as more formal, and also it read as more formal landscaping from like a human perspective, but also it's totally what occurs in nature, and it makes it so it's less energy for the bee to fly around, because a lot of them will tend to visit the same species all day long because that's the good thing to eat today. Some of bees' favorites, and this is just based off of, these aren't the only things. These are just some of the things that based off of I don't even want to try to assume how many thousands of hours of pollinator observations I think I've done. But these ones tend to be teeming with native bees. Black-eyed Susan, which I've now mentioned for like the 4th time today, but it really is my favorite. Penstemon, which I have blooming right outside my window right now, has just been super attractive all day. I really like to sit at my window and watch the bees come visit while I'm working. Culver's root is another one that it blooms at a nice time in between. I'll show you some bloom staggered times as we move forward today. Any kind of clover at all, even like clover in your lawn, tends to be attractive to bees, but I've highlighted a native species of clover here, purple prairie clover, which is really cute. Bee balm, which is Monarda, it's a type of mint. Bees really love mints. And then getting into fall, goldenrod is always a classic. It blooms so late into the season, and especially getting into those late October days, they're covered with beneficial insects. This is a resource that I really like based on the type of soil that you have available. And I have these links available on the last slide and can put a couple in the chat if that's helpful. But it's Pollinator Native Plants. And in particular, this one by Heather Holm is great because you can do this by your soil type as well. So these are native species in our region. And based on the soils that you're dealing with, because not all of these plants are going to be successful if you, oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, even between my front and backyard, I have really, really different soils. I have a really sandy spot in the back. And this is complete clay in the front yard. And I can't keep the same plants happy, which seems to be a really similar spot in my yard. And through extension, and maybe I can ask about this at the end if there's a resource, but there are ways to tell your soil texture. All you need is a jar. You just need a scoop of soil, a jar, and some water. You just shake it up and let it settle out, and you can measure it. So we'll make sure to mention that again at the end, in case if you're interested. I'm making myself a note so I don't forget to bring that up. This is the resource I mentioned. And again, I'll put the link at the end. This is one through Michigan State Extension that I absolutely love. I have this hanging up in my office at work. You can actually see all of these different species, and notice nothing is red, right? Like a lot of these are really attractive to bees or other beneficial insects. So things that are beneficial insects either could be pollinators or things that eat pests. And show that you can start with wild strawberry in May and then get all the way through to some of the really nice blooming asters and that goldenrod in the fall. Let's see, are poppy flowers good? Oh, you know what? That's a great question about poppy flowers. I have not observed poppy flowers, so I can't answer that one. I'm not sure if you're seeing them attracting bees, then I absolutely believe you. Oh, thank you for putting the soil test in there. I appreciate that link. But that's a great question. And yes, this chart is for Michigan. There's a really neat experiment out at Michigan State where they had a bunch of plots, like small plots, and a team of grad students were like collecting all of the insects that were visiting each of these things. So this is a data-based experimental results showing when these things are blooming. And yes, these are the ones you want. And the ones with 3 stars were the best at either those natural enemies or for bees. We'll put that link at the end. Oh, thank you very much. That's not to say there aren't other plants you can consider. Sometimes if you're looking at these, maybe it's not a place where you can have stuff that tends to be up at, prairie height or whatever that may be. Or perhaps you're considering this in your, like a vegetable garden or like a community garden in your plot, and you want it to be something that you're also like eating as opposed to it being an ornamental. Totally okay. So here we have creeping thyme, oregano, rosemary, sage, there's a catmint and basil, and allowing these to go to flower, or at least allowing one of like your 5 to go to flower. The bees also love these resources if you're more interested in like edible things in the garden that you're maintaining. And then I saw the question about if you could buy the chart as a poster. You actually, I think you can just print it out. It's a free PDF. So foraging specificity. Not all bees visit all flowers all the time. So some bees require certain pollen types. And that doesn't mean they won't go to other flowers for nectar, but they have a very specific pollen requirement. And they tend to specialize on an entire genus of, I have 4 here, but of flowering plants. So what I mean by that is it might just go to sunflowers, and pretty much you only see these on sunflowers. They are active when sunflowers are active, and that's kind of this one-to-one match you always see. So if you're interested in supporting some of our specialist bees, sunflowers are great to plant, and Monarda, that bee balm or that mint. Those are 2 that you're going to get some of our specialist bee species. So moving along, let's start talking about the bees. We have over 450 species of native bees in Michigan. We're going to go over some of these common types of by their common names. So the sweat bees, leafcutter and mason bees, plasterer bees, bumblebees, and carpenter bees. First up are the sweat bees. And these are incredibly common. Let me accept this Latin name. Apologies for that. They're in the family Halictidae. They're all sweat bees, and they're called sweat bees because they will land on you and lick the sweat off your skin. They need that salt requirement. And these are some of our most common species. And if you look down right now and look kind of at your pinky nail, like the length of the width of your pinky nail is actually a really common size of what these would be. These are soil nesting species. They are typically like, fingernail in length size. The females will collect pollen on their leg hairs, and these ones are out and about the entire time. Different species will be active at different times. So a certain species you see out and about in like April or May, you might not see that the rest of the season. It might just be an early spring bee. There are some summer bees or some late summer fall bees. There are some species that are, pretty much out as long as there's flowers out. Next up, we have leafcutter and mason bees. And leafcutter bees are called leafcutter bees because they cut little pieces of leaves and line their nests with them. Sometimes you can see the evidence of these on the plants in your garden. And if you put out a bee condo or notice some sort of nook or cranny and it looks like there's a little wreath hanging on the door, it's a leafcutter bee. And that female has lined the inside of her nest to help with water and temperature with little pieces of leaves. There are some bees that also do these with flower petals, and it's absolutely beautiful. These are in the family Megachilidae, and the females will have pollen carrying hairs on the underside of their abdomens. Because they're these leafcutter bees, they tend to have these really big, well, I call them chompers, but really big mandibles. So you can see here, those mandibles are what they use to sort of trim out these leaf pieces. These, again, depending different species on the family, you'll see leafcutter and mason bees out from mid-spring through fall. And the upper left-hand side here, we can see a not native species, but one that is becoming more common. It's in the genus Amphidium. They really look like pottery, like the abdomen just looks like these perfect little pottery lines here. I see a question about why are most bees black and yellow? And some of this can be like warning systems. So technically, yes, bees could sting, and wasps or hornet, anything kind of in that family. We'll talk about stingers in a little bit. Well, I'll just spoil it right now. Only female bees have a stinger to begin with. It's actually a modified, what's called ovipositor. So ova, like an egg, posit. So it's a modified thing, like a little spike that helps with egg placement. So the males don't have a stinger at all, but females do. And unlike honeybees, a native bee, if there is a sting, the bee doesn't die. It's more like getting a little pinprick, and she flies away. And she's also, I'm assuming, terrified because, she was scared. With honeybees, honeybee stingers have a lot of backward facing barbs all over them. It looks like a bunch of tiny fish hooks all over. So when the honeybee flies away, its body rips in half and the stinger stays in you. So if you get a little native bee sting, which I think feels more like poking yourself with a pin, that's it. You don't have to worry about getting the stinger or anything. There's no allergy issue, like nothing. You don't have to worry about it. It might just hurt for a minute and go away. Moving on. We have the Plasterer bees, which are in the family Clepto-parasties. These ones, if you ever see this sort of soil nest and it looks like there's saran wrap over top, you're so lucky, and I'm jealous of you, but that may very well be a nest of Clepto-parasties. These are kind of out midsummer. They carry pollen on their leg hairs. They have the sweetest little faces that have this like heart shape, the way that their eyes are kind of bulgy and on the sides. I have a note here that they're the most primitive of bees, and that's from an evolutionary perspective. And so based on some phylogenetic work, or just looking at DNA and how closely related species are, these are the bees that are believed to be most closely related to wasps. So wasps came first, and then when flowering plants diversified, that's when bees and flowers kind of evolved together, which is in part why having native plants to our region is why native plants or native bees from the region respond so well to them, because they kind of came up together over time. Bumblebees, we have more than 10 species in Michigan. You know these. I know they're adorable and super fuzzy, so their abdomen is also really fuzzy. They really can range in size. The big ones, like as big as your thumb and completely fuzzy, really early in the spring, those are probably queens that are going out and foraging until their first brood of workers is able to take over that job for her. Bumblebees are the one where there really is a social structure for our native species with a queen and workers. And then the males, which are super teeny tiny, tend to come way toward the end of the season. Bumblebee nests, although different from honeybee nests, they do collect pollen and sort of regurgitate nectar in these little pot sort of shaped things they make. It's not the same as honey, but similar idea, different scale, where bumblebee hives can be in the tens of thousands of individuals. Honeybee hives, a really big hive might be in the hundreds of individuals, and smaller is also normal. And you can tell the species apart using the way their stripes are. So there's a really, I'm not sure why this link is showing up such a strange color. Let me make this anything you can see. So with Bee Spotter, if you just Google Bee Spotter, and again, I'll put all these links at the end, it's on the final page. You can help collect data in tracking bumblebees. And one especially important one here is our endangered native bumblebee, Bombus affinis, the rusty patched bumblebee. So you see this little rusty patch that's surrounded by yellow. And if you're out and about, you see a bumblebee with a little rusty patch, just snap a picture and upload it. You're helping scientists and conservationists track this endangered species. The recent declines in bees especially can be tracked with bumblebee data, because there's a lot of historic data on bumblebees. A lot of it is attributed to habitat loss and climate change. And in particular for bumblebees, climate change is an issue. The hive is able to warm itself up, but they can't cool themselves down. And so populations are shifting further northward or higher up in elevation to reach the cooler temperatures. A bumblebee nest, that's a great question. You would find a bumblebee nest, they tend to be in the ground, and they will move into like abandoned rodent homes or an abandoned rodent nest. You might find it's like a pre-existing little spot. You can set out what's called a bee box if you're trying to attract them, which essentially looks like a wooden shoebox with a hole, with like 2 holes in it. That could be a way to create a nesting site for bumblebees. Maybe just put some straw or litter in there. But they really like abandoned rodent nests. An old mouse house would be a perfect place. Here's a picture of some of those banding patterns and how they can differ. And a cuckoo bee is the same as those kleptoparasites. So there are those parasitic bumblebees here as well. And you can see those banding patterns of that endangered species. So if you're interested, you can help save the bees by just taking pictures. With the carpenter bees, we mentioned the little holes that they make. And I was talking about how you can tell the difference between a carpenter bee and a bumblebee. So you might describe them the same way. They're big. Carpenter bees tend to be, you know, about the size of your thumb. They're yellow, fuzzy, and black. But the key thing here, you see this abdomen is very shiny. In the lab, well, I won't say what, they have shiny butts. That's how we used to say it. I hope that's okay to say on a recording. But they have a really shiny abdomen, and they have this like hovering behavior. So they can be a little territorial. They'll just come check you out. They like to check out the highest moving thing. And I've noticed if they're checking you out, or maybe you're with someone who it's freaking them out that this bee is checking them out, if you put something above your head, they'll go check that out instead. They just kind of go to the highest moving thing. I've had good luck with that in the past. But there are 2 different kinds of carpenter bees in Michigan. The first is that big one that looks a lot like a bumblebee with the shiny abdomen. And those are Xylocopa. There's only one, it's Xylocopa virginica. That's our one species of the big carpenter bee that we have here. And the other one is this really sweet and slender, it's much smaller. And these 2, like to scale, that's probably relatively correct, is Seratina. And this bee is metallic blue and is rather like sort of slender looking. How I described a lot of bees are kind of chunky, like snowmen stacked on top of each other. This one is elongated, looks a little different, and is metallic blue. Probably around fingernail length again too, right about that size. Oh, a bumblebee nest in a rodent bait box. That could absolutely be true. I see that. It's a good comment. So we are wrapping up with a few fun facts and some mimics. I'll share my resources, and then there is time for questions at the end. So just making sure when we leave that we know not all bees make honey. Honeybees make honey. Honeybees are not native to North America, like we discussed. Not all bees can sting you. Male bees don't have stingers, and there are entire families and groups of bees, especially in the tropics, that are actually stingless bees. So even the females don't have stingers there. So bees don't die after they sting. So if a female native bee, but this is, let's see, what year did I start studying bees? 2005. I've been doing bee field work ever since 2005. And I've had 3 bee stings ever. And this is like collecting bees in nets. And then you take the net, you can even put it over your head and like look inside to try to figure out, like, this is not careful, like being super careful. But my 3 have been if I accidentally pinched a sweat bee and didn't see her. So if like I grabbed a bee in the net, it was like, ooh, ow, for a second, and then goes away, kind of like a rubber band thwack. And then she was fine and I was fine, and we parted ways. Most bees don't live in a hive with a queen. So the majority of our native bees are solitary. And just because a bee is small doesn't mean it's like a baby or a little juvenile bee. This is the head face looking at the carpenter bees. So imagine, that kind of thumb-sized bee. So this face is smaller than your thumbnail. And this is Perdita minima, our tiniest bee that we would have here. And that really is how small it is compared to a carpenter bee. Just picture a big bumblebee in generic size. If you can't, the thumb thing is a weird thing for me to keep saying, but these little perdita, their common name, they're called fairy bees, and they're adorable. If you're trying to study them, you even need a special kind of net. It's like a lot of times we'll buy, like go to Joann's and buy like bridal veil, like really thin fabric that it doesn't even look like a mesh screen of a net. It's just like super thin sheer fabric in order to be able to catch them, because they can fly through most nets because the little holes are too big for them. I loved that question about bees and colors, because some things want you to think they're bees so you don't eat them or attack them. So we have here some mimics, and everything on this slide is actually a fly. And the couple ways we can tell, we had our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 about bees. So these flies, they only have 2 wings. And when a fly is at rest, the way that its wings are resting, it makes that triangle, sort of like I think it looks like a fighter jet or something, but it makes this triangle shape. When bees are at rest, their wings, they will flap them over each other. And sometimes when they're just landing and eating, they'll be all 4 wings and you'll see all 4. But if you just see this triangle, what am I looking at here? So that can be a really good sign. And another one, if we remember for our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, how bees have 5 eyes, flies have these 2 giant eyes that like completely take over their entire head. And once you get used to looking at pictures of fly eyes, that's a lot of times the giveaway, along with their behavior. A lot of these pictures, some I'm trying to trick you. I found pictures of flies landing on flowers, but bees and flies aren't necessarily attracted to the same kinds of flowers. And a lot of times when you have a mimic, it lands on a ridiculous part of the plant, like it lands on the leaf or it lands on the petal, and it doesn't actually go to where the nectar or pollen are located. Okay, so it seems a lot of the links are already in there. Thank you so much in the chat. So here are some of my favorite resources. Xerces.org, they are an invertebrate conservation organization. They have so many great resources about native pollinators, protecting native pollinators, native bees. It's a great site. The Pollinators Native Plants was the one I mentioned that had the soils type, the plants recommended by different types of soils. The Bee Spotter is the citizen science program you can participate in and take pictures of bees. If you're interested in trying to figure out what bees you found, Discover Life is an amazing website. It can be a little like taxonomically intense, but there are amazing photos. So it's a fun place it's sort of like an encyclopedia vibe. If you want to sort of flip through and just look at like what species are where, it's really cool. There's 2 wonderful books, The Bees in Your Backyard, and that's where the poster picture I keep showing you of all the different bees. The Bees in Your Backyard is a fantastic book. Attracting Native Pollinators is another really great one that I think actually came out of Xerces. Oh, thank you so much. All these links are already here. And then I know this one had already been shared with us. It's the Attracting Beneficial Insects with Native Flowering Plants. This is that free PDF, and it is high res. Like I think you could print that out any size you wanted to.